I believe that we would not be able to exist as a nation if we didn't have democracy. For after all, how would you define an Indian? An Indian is one who is not understood by most Indians when he speaks. An Indian is one who doesn't understand what most other Indians have to say. An Indian is one who wouldn't be seen dead wearing the clothes of another Indian. An Indian is one who finds most of the food of other Indians indigestible. An Indian is one who doesn't dance the same dances as others and doesn't sing the same songs as others. And the chances are that an Indian is one whose religion is not the same as that of another. Certainly an Indian is one whose color is not the same as another Indian and whose race is not the same as another Indian. Now, in this amazing diversity, how do you succeed in being Indian? I don't think India waited for the Commonwealth Games to start building roads or to start building railways or to put up airports. If you need airports, build them. If you need flyovers, build them. If you want to build metros, build them. But why link it to a sports event?
Welcome to the Royal Geographical Society and tonight's latest Intelligence Squared debate on democracy in India. India is hailed as the world's biggest democracy, and I think it was you, Patrick, who made the point that every second person in the world living in a democracy is actually living in India, which is quite an astonishing thought. But the question is, what does Indian democracy mean? Is it the glue that holds India together and allows it to flourish and drives its creativity and vitality? Or is it a curse that's encouraged corruption and social division and perpetuated poverty? Is it India's Achilles heel? Okay, so very quickly, William and Mani, you've got a chance to quiz Suhail on what he's just said.
So what you're saying is that democracy is a bad form of government, but you don't think that there's an alternative, better form of government. And are you suggesting that good governance could come through dictatorship when it cannot come through democracy? Are you on your side or are you on my side?
See, this is what I'd expected of Mani to do wordplay, you know. But we're not here in a school debate. So let's get back to the seriousness of the topic. What I said was that democracy in its current form in India has certain flaws. Those flaws need to be ironed out within the domain of democracy. To quote myself ad verbatim, just so that you realize what I was saying, I said those course corrections need to happen within the domain of democracy. We are not suggesting, Mani, for any reason whatsoever, that we either want you as the potentate or one of your ilk as a person who then drives the destiny of 1.2 billion people, hurtling us towards very, very interesting disasters.
But on the other hand, Achilles couldn't. But on the other hand, Achilles couldn't get his heel corrected.
But that was because of his mother.
How do you describe our democracy as Achilles' heel?
Correct.
He was born with that defect. And I don't think our democracy is incapable of being reformed. It's being reformed all the time.
Mani went to Oxford or Cambridge or one of those renowned institutions. So obviously his sense of history is pretty rusted knobs, that he spent so many years in India's parliament battling the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let me remind him of the Greek myth of Achilles. Achilles wasn't born with any defects. His mother dunked him into a river and held him by one heel and forgot to dunk him a second time round to make sure that that second heel was as vibrant as the first. So don't blame Achilles, blame his mother. And in this case, who will you blame?
I'll tell you whom I'll blame. Are you suggesting then that the British should rule us twice?
I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything.
Last but by no means least, our second speaker against the motion is Mani Shankar Aiyar. Because how could you possibly have this debate without an Indian politician taking part?
Thank you very much. Mr. French is, of course, not French. And even so, his argument is not sincere. For he arrives here and tells us that the Indian democracy is a fatal weakness of the structure of that state. He tells us that it is a non-functional state. Or might I remind him that at page 105 of his latest book, India, he describes Indian democracy as, quote, a self-balancing ecosystem. If I go back one book,
And at the moment it's
he wrote a book called Tibet, in which he says, Tibet is ruled not by terror, but by the absence of freedom. The one thing that you don't lack in India is freedom. Then his first book, he says he's inspired. In fact, I think he's named because of that after Patrick Henry. He's inspired by the slogan, give me liberty or give me death. And then he fetches up before you and says he'd rather have death than to have liberty. I think we should put this kind of hypocrisy in its proper perspective. And to do so, I will draw from my own life. When I was in the Indian Foreign Service, I served for 1 year under the dictatorship of Ho Chi Minh. I then had 2 years under the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein. And finally, I had 3 years under the dictatorship of Ziaul Haq. It's made me a Democrat for life. We are given to understand that human development in India has not improved. That was Suhail's point. Of course it hasn't improved because we don't have enough democracy, not because we have too much democracy. We have taken democracy in India out from simply parliament and the state assemblies and taken it right down to the grassroots, where in India today we have 300,000 institutions of local self-government, to which we have elected 3.2 million representatives, of whom 1.8 million are women, 86,000 of whom hold office in these local bodies. This is empowerment participation on a scale that is without precedent in history and without parallel in the world. And yet, Suhail and Patrick can only look at the pulchritude that we get in our headlines, which tell us that there's nothing but corruption in our democracy. I think what they need to understand is that democracy is only a necessary condition of good governance. It is not a sufficient condition. But if you don't have democracy, you can't have good governance. For all examples we have of non-democratic countries are countries in which corruption, as in a democracy, is often much larger. Nepotism, as in a democracy, is much more acute. And undesirables being in power. I can't think of anybody more undesirable than Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin. It's added to oppression, to discrimination, and inescapability. Why, even in the houses in Westminster, we have the interesting spectacle of democracy being turned into murdocracy. So I don't think there's any democracy that's not flawed. But every dictatorship is flawed. And therefore, instead of twisting the subject before us, which is whether democracy is our Achilles heel, into saying that our democracy is flawed, I know of no democracy that's not flawed. But I also know of no alternative system that is not even more flawed. So the point is the one that is before us. Is democracy crippling us? Or is democracy enabling us to survive? Let me begin and look at this in the perspective of a politician, one who has to stand for elections. It's the most risk-prone job that we have in India. There's a word which exists in the English language, but which is rarely to be seen in the Times of London and is to be seen all the time in the Indian newspapers. It's anti-incumbency. The punishment that is accorded to politicians is for 2/3 of all MPs to be defeated at the subsequent election. there is no doubt at all that punishment is meted out by the people to its rulers in our country. And that therefore, if you are not very, very careful, the chances are that if you dissatisfy those who've elected you, they're going to have the great joy of kicking you out once again. And it is this that keeps what Patrick in his wiser moments described as the self-balancing ecosystem of our society. He has put all his emphasis on criminalization in Indian politics. But where did he meet the criminal? By his own confession, in jail. If criminals are not being chased into jail, how did he meet Mukhtar Ansari in jail? And yes, there are these people who got charges against them. Many of them are very controversial persons against whom their opponents seek to file false cases. We have many, many people in our politics who are charged with crime from of a very minor nature to a very, very, very serious nature. And yet, does their being in Parliament or does their being in the Assembly stop them from being taken into courts? Stop them from being put into jail? As of this minute, we've got half a dozen of the most prominent politicians in India, people on whom the government depends, who are sitting in the Tihar jail, charged with serious crimes. And they're not able to come out because our courts, in this self-balancing ecosystem, ensures that even if the people have made the mistake of electing a wrong man to Parliament, the courts are there to ensure that he should go where he deserves to go, which is the jail. I think we ought to also recognize that...
He's a parliamentarian from India. They
I
don't
think,
listen.
I think
Okay, Mani.
I think we
Time to
also
start
need
wrapping
to
up.
recognize that it is only in a democracy that politicians are denigrated. It's only in dictatorships that you have the kind of adulation that people like Hitler and Stalin received. So I'm delighted that Suhail Seth is able to get up and make abusive remarks about me in London because he'll survive when he gets back to Delhi. Had he been a Chinese, then we would have loved to see him swinging slowly, slowly in the wind.
Suhail and Patrick, your chance to come back.
You know, money always reminds you of college day debating standards. Lace your speech with humor, forget the facts. 2 quick questions, Mani. Hand on your heart. I don't know when you last put it there. Do you genuinely believe Indira Gandhi's return to power and Narendra Modi's constant electoral victories, are they not, in your mind, a mockery of a form of democracy, especially to the people who've died? 1984, we had the Sikh riots. We then had the program in Gujarat.
And your
Quick
second
comments.
question?
I'm going to put my hand exactly in the place where Suhail Seth puts his purse, on my heart, and answer that Mrs. Gandhi's comeback in 1980 was a telling vindication of our democracy, for when the people disliked her, they not only defeated her party, they defeated her son, they defeated her, and she was rendered absolutely in the Siberia of Indian democracy. And then when they saw the alternative and the circus that was going on in the country, they said, we'd like to have you back. Now, I can't think of a more democratic system than one which punishes you for the mistakes you've made and then forgives you because you're going to make a better prime minister.
Okay, Patrick.
As for Narendra Modi, may I assure Suhail Seth that if he and his boss Ratan Tata stop supporting Narendra Modi, we'll defeat him in the next election, and that's coming in a few months.
No, This is again typical Mani. One of his colleagues looks at Facebook pages to determine facts. This man quotes out of context. Every party and every industrialist has commented on Narendra Modi's form of transformational governance qua industry. I'm making a larger point, Mani, on which I want your response. Do you believe it is essential to welcome murderers as form of democrats only because you have jails to send them to? Would you much rather not have a system where they don't come into politics in the first place?
I don't think the Indian capitalists whom you serve should be praising these murderers. I have for the last 10 years been condemning this murderer, saying that no one should vote for him. But he is getting the support of a class which you referred to, which is attempting to capture our democracy. They may win once, they may win twice, but we, the people of India, will defeat them the third time.
Okay. He's already won thrice.
Okay. Yeah, I've just got a couple of quick points. One is that you talk about Panchayati Raj, the idea of local self-government, something that you personally strongly believe in, I know, from your time when you were the relevant minister. But isn't the reality that actually that form of local self-government has very often not worked? In the largest state in India, UP, at the moment, you need to pay about 5 million rupees in order to become a block president. There are numerous examples in Lucknow of prostitutes and liquor being supplied to candidates by other parties. There are numerous cases in Ghaziabad of people being kidnapped. And in the words of Omer Anas's recent report, local elections in UP are hijacked by mafia because nothing is bigger than caste and cash. In other words, democracy at that local level is not functioning. And my second point I'd just like you to quickly answer is that you gave an interview to Reuters today when you said that the minute the Gandhi family is no longer in Congress, the party will begin to fall apart. Wouldn't it be easier to just change the Republic of India to the Monarchy of India? You can have Queen Sonia, you can have a Crown Prince. That would solve your problems. You wouldn't have to worry about elections.
My answer to your first question is, instead of picking the worst example, is the one state where you don't have Panchayat Raj at all, you have Sarpanch Raj. I would suggest that you go to Kerala. I would suggest you visit Karnataka. I would suggest you go to Maharashtra. I would suggest you go to West Bengal. I'd suggest you go to Sikkim. I suggest you go to Tripura and see whether the peculiar syndrome of non-Panchayati Raj being run by criminals is replicated in states that have sincere Panchayati Raj. As for this charge of dynastic rule, I find is one that is difficult to sustain. Why are none of Mahatma Gandhi's children or grandchildren in politics? Why is it that every time they stand, they get defeated? Why are Vallabhbhai Patel's children or grandchildren?
You think they haven't tried to get tickets?
Why are they not defeated? In the case of the Gandhi family, they may get appointed by us because we'd like to have them, and that's our democratic right. But then they have to first get themselves validated within the party.
No,
then they have to get them. No, then they have to.
Do you think it's acceptable that 9 out of 10 of your younger MPs are hereditary?
We'll first finish with the Gandhis and then come to the others.
You can never finish with the Gandhis. You can't finish with the Gandhis.
We'll first finish with the Gandhis in this discussion. We will, in the case of the Gandhis, apart from Jawaharlal Nehru, there is no one who has not been defeated at the polls. Insofar as Nehru was concerned, he was defeated within the party and then he had to come back. If in a democratic system, you say that Randolph Churchill's son, Winston Churchill, can be the prime minister here, if you can have a series of 3 Chamberlains, Joseph, Austin, and Neville, and if the Duke of Devonshire can convert the houses of Westminster into a kind of Hindu undivided family, then I just don't see why being born in a particular womb should disqualify you from being in politics.
But nobody's suggesting that you can't have 1 or 2 hereditary politicians.
And while you have taken great pains to find out the number of children who've succeeded, you haven't taken any trouble at all to inform them of the number of children who failed. There are many, many sons and daughters of politicians who get defeated at the polls. There are some who win. And the fact is that only 30 of those who are in the Lok Sabha have come in because of their parents. The remaining 512 have come in of their own accord. I don't know what is the point you're attempting to make.
Okay. China's economy seems to be doing a great deal better than India. And if political infighting and nepotism is not a risk for investors, what is? plus the question that the hereditary principle seems to spread across all professions, not just politicians. Okay?
I do not think, I repeat the point that I made at the start, I do not think a person's birth should stand in the way of his or her coming into politics. It's not Rahul Gandhi's fault that he is Sonia Gandhi's son. And if he wishes to come into politics, that's entirely up to him. Whether he succeeds or not will not be determined by Sonia Gandhi, it will be determined by the people of India. And the people of India have more than once said, we don't want the Nehrus. But in our party, having been in it for the last 20 years, I know that the one time there's true inner party democracy is when we have the distribution of tickets. That's when people come and fight for it and secure it. Even just now, there is a local body election taking place in Tamil Nadu in the next few weeks. And throughout the day, I've been receiving these phone calls from Madras about people wishing to stand as councillors and as small representatives to village panchayats and village councils. So I think the hereditary principle will apply to those who wish to come in. They'll succeed only if they get the support of the people. But I repeat that if 30 members of the lower house today are the children of eminent politicians, 521 are not. And it's much more significant, I think, that people who wish to come into politics enter this highly risk-prone vocation, suffer the indignity of being defeated.
Mani, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Democracy is not a solution. Democracy is a framework for a solution. Therefore, as any society has flaws, so also would any democracy have its flaws. But the possibility of correcting these flaws without throwing the baby out with the bathwater is far greater in a democracy than in any other form of government. I think we need to discuss the issue before us today, which is whether democracy is the Achilles heel, in other words, the weakest point of the existence of India or the strongest point of the existence of India. And I believe that we would not be able to exist as a nation if we didn't have democracy. For after all, how would you define an Indian? An Indian is one who is not understood by most Indians when he speaks. An Indian is one who doesn't understand what most other Indians have to say. An Indian is one who wouldn't be seen dead wearing the clothes of another Indian. An Indian is one who finds most of the food of other Indians indigestible. An Indian is one who doesn't dance the same dances as others and doesn't sing the same songs as others. And the chances are that an Indian is one whose religion is not the same as that of another. Certainly an Indian is one whose color is not the same as another Indian and whose race is not the same as another Indian. Now, in this amazing diversity, how do you succeed in being Indian? What is an Indian? Well, my provisional answer is, an Indian is one who accepts that anyone who calls himself an Indian is an Indian. Now, this kind of a society can only be sustained by a democracy in which, in addition to all the other diversities, we also have diversity of political opinion. I just totally hate to put the fate of my country into the hands of Suhail Seth. But in case the people of India make this grave mistake, and he has the guts to stand in an election, then we will find out where we'll have to accept it. And it'll still give me the opportunity of defeating him next time. And I don't get that opportunity in China. And Chinese economic development was beautifully described to me by Huang Ping of the Academy of Social Sciences, who said that progress in China means first they make you landless in order to give you a job. Then they make you unemployed, so if you're without a job, you then become homeless. And when you're homeless, you have to leave the place where you're working and staying and look for somewhere else to go. So you become hopeless. So he says what we call it is that you move us from being first landless into being homeless, and from homeless into being hopeless. Now, I don't think that's a very happy system. And the cauldron is boiling inside China. There's a Chinese student at the Jawaharlal Nehru University who was asked, what do you find is the difference between Chinese students and Indian students? And his astonishing reply was that I don't understand why Indian students, like Chinese students, are not out on the streets. There are thousands of demonstrations taking place every day in China. And it's the kettles, the lid of the kettle is on, and therefore the steam is building up. Whereas in India, even if we do have 1 million mutinies taking place, there's a full opportunity all the time to try and get an answer out. And that is why, despite the fact that there is a lot of trouble and a lot of discontent in India, as Harry Doyle said, we still do not think that the answer to our problems lies in picking up the gun and shooting everybody around. We believe that the answer lies in the ballot and not the bullet.
Thank you. So now here comes the moment we've all been waiting for, to find out whether the vote has swung one way or another. Let me remind you of what the vote was before the debate. Those in favour of the motion that democracy is India's Achilles heel was 117, and those against 155, with 177 of you, that boggy place in the middle, who hadn't quite decided. Well, the don't knows are now 19. So the debaters have certainly done their work in swinging people over to one side or the other. And those in favour of the motion, who think that democracy is India's Achilles heel, who join Patrick and Suhail with that thought, 159. 159, so quite a boost. But those who are against the motion, who are with William and Mani on this, 266.
Hello, I'm Zainab Badawi. Welcome to the Ivan Franko Theatre in the Ukrainian capital Kiev for this Intelligence Squared debate. Ukraine is, of course, along with Poland, host of the Euro 2012 Football Championships. And you know what? The country is already gearing up for this momentous occasion. But will it be an honour or a burden? So now our debate can begin. Our motion: is the hosting of major sports events good for a nation's health? We've got a great panel lined up for you. 2 for the motion, 2 against. Arguing for the motion, Lord Mandelson, the former British Cabinet Minister under the Labour governments. Also for the motion, Markian Lubkivsky from UEFA here in Ukraine. And arguing against the motion, we have the former Indian Sports Minister, Mani Shankar, and also South African social activist, Dipolo Peko. That's our panel. Welcome to you all. Against the motion is our next speaker, Mani Shankar, and until 2008 he was India's Minister for Sport and Youth Affairs. He's now in the upper chamber of the Indian Parliament, and he was really opposed to Delhi hosting the Commonwealth Games last year. Mani Shankar.
Madam Chairperson, may I immediately reject Lord Mandelson's argument that I am against the motion because it doesn't have to be like India. I find that an exceptionally insulting statement to make, and I believe that I'm on this side not because I'm opposed to sports, nor because I'm opposed to sports persons, but because I am opposed to making a business of sports. Ordinary sports events, the events that take place in a village, the events that take place in a university or in a school, I welcome them. But why does it have to become a major business event? Lord Mandelson argues that the best thing about these mega sports events is that they leave a major lasting legacies. Why do we have to link infrastructure or investment or urban regeneration or attracting foreign investment or attracting tourism to kicking a ball around a field? These are national tasks. They have to be undertaken in any case. I don't think India waited for the Commonwealth Games to start building roads or to start building railways or to put up airports. If you need airports, build them. If you need flyovers, build them. If you want to build metros, build them. But why link it to a sports event? Indeed, it is only a sensible country like China, which had all this, which had proved that it was an economic miracle, and after it had established itself as a major economic power and potentially a major political power, that it hosted these games. When you're a fading empire like the United Kingdom, or a country that hasn't really risen like India, for us to start trying to substitute nation building by becoming hosts of mega sports events is to delude the world and to delude ourselves. We have spent on the Commonwealth Games in Delhi $18 billion. Yes, Delhi needs $18 billion. Delhi, in fact, needs even $80 billion. But what about the rest of the country? What about all those 1 billion people and more who are not going to be beneficiaries of whatever is the legacy, if any, of the Commonwealth Games in Delhi? Lord Mandelson says that you need these games to put Ukraine on the map. Ukraine has been on the map since 988. Ukraine has been on the map in such a way that it has been coveted on the east by Russia and on the west by Germany. Ukraine is a country that has suffered enormously because of its place on the map. And to suggest that you cannot get people to be interested in Ukraine if you don't hold a football match here is to underestimate both the intelligence of outsiders and the imagination of the people of Ukraine. There has been massive waste of money in the organization of the mega sports event in India. For never forget that even if there are a few million Indians who are able to speak English and dine with Lord Mandelson knowing how to use a fork and a knife, there are 1 billion Indians who live on less than 16 UAH a day. And this is the country that decided to project an image of itself on this circus, which was called the Commonwealth Games. Thank you very much.
So there are our opening arguments. They're being very robust here, you know. But it's interesting because you, audience, we actually polled you, as you know, when you were coming in before you heard the opening arguments. And we're going to ask you to also vote again at the end of this debate to see if your opinions have changed. And what I find interesting is listening to our four speakers, you are actually applauding the speakers against the motion the hosting of major sports events is good for a nation's health. Let me tell you how you voted. So for the motion, 66%. Against the motion, so you've got a huge advantage there. Against the motion, 20%. And the don't knows are 14%. But I don't know, you might have a lot to play for, you know, because judging by the response you were getting to your comments, you never know, you might find there's a huge sea change moving towards you. So, panellists, you can still sway the votes in here. And I'd like to start taking some questions from the floor. Please.
My question is to Mani. Should Ukraine have cancelled the event? In your opinion?
To actually withdraw from the games? You're asking, Mani, if Ukraine should withdraw?
Withdrawn with the game?
This is a decision for Ukrainians to take and not for Indians to advise you. But this I'll tell you, holding these championships in order to improve the health of your economy is like giving aspirin for a case of AIDS. The answer does not lie in holding a one-off sporting event along with Poland.
But you don't want to give him any advice about whether Ukraine could even now cancel, withdraw?
I think it would be presumptuous of me to give any advice to Ukraine on what it should do, as I would regard it as somewhat presumptuous for the Ukrainians to tell me whether we should have withdrawn from the games. I think we should have, but then not even Indians listen to me, so why would I expect the Ukrainians to do so?
Lord Mandelson.
You know, to be honest, if that's the sort of advice you gave the Indian people, I'm surprised they didn't listen to you, because I think for Ukraine to withdraw from these games, to cancel their hosting of Euro 2012 would be an absolute disaster for this country. And I'm afraid I am unambiguous about that, and I will say it very forthrightly. What would it say about a country? So I say to you, Ukraine doesn't suffer from AIDS, as you say, and it doesn't therefore need an aspirin. What it does need is a big boost for its economy. It needs to know that Ukraine is a welcoming people, open for business, ready to bring investment and new jobs and employment to its country, and that's what these games are.
In the case of India, if my advice had been listened to and we'd withdrawn, we'd have not been in a situation where from an initial projected expenditure of $500 million, we went up to $18 billion simply because of the false prestige involved. It's this distortion of national values and national priorities.
Markian, and that's Markian, and it's related. It's related. Markian, come in. It's related to the question about, based on economic calculations, whether you recover costs, please.
I want just to make a very short remark. To take the euro from Ukraine is not an issue. It's reality. Ukraine will host in Poland euro in 2012. This is done.
Was it a popular decision when you made the bid?
Yeah, for sure.
So it was something that the masses backed. You're sure of that?
Yeah, I'm sure of that. So, and one more thing to give a reply to. So the total amount of direct costs for UEFA Euro 2012 for Ukraine is only 750 millions of US dollars, and I'm speaking only about 2 stadia, because the rest, I mean, new airports. In Mani, you are absolutely right. This is the obligation of state to construct new airports, so that's why I'm not counting that. So,
well, DiPolo said that in South Africa they built a new airport in Johannesburg that they didn't particularly need.
You know, I visited South Africa last year, so I think that Leopoldo is the only unhappy person from South Africa.
He liked the airport, DiPolo.
Everybody was happy there.
We may have looked happy for that moment, Marikana, but I mean, the reality is that the economy has not benefited in any way from that. And don't mistake euphoria for joy, and don't mistake it for success, ultimately. And I think that nobody has answered the gentleman with the red tie about the visa. I think that's a very important question, because it is linked to belonging. It is linked to a different kind of belonging and welcomingness. And that's a very critical question. What is the marker of belonging that these games tend to bring to nations, to continents? What is the marker of inclusivity? And what is the marker of citizenship, of being part of a larger community? If I had the choice personally between easy mobility around the world versus kicking a ball around and watching sporting events that I could watch on DSTV, I think I would go for the easy mobility, but that's just me.
Mani, one question. Is it bad to make profits out of sports?
Yes. If you're going to invest in a business, then you need to make profits. But are we talking about sports or are we talking about business? My objection is only that if we have mega sports events, why not spread them to the more deprived parts of our countries? We don't do that. We tend to do it in capitals. London, Kyiv, Beijing, New Delhi. It's not the villages of India that benefit.
It's complete rubbish. It's complete rubbish. The London Olympics that are being constructed in 2012 next year are drawing on businesses creating jobs, goods, services, commodities, steel all over the United Kingdom. Do you really think that we could simply deliver the games in London, only using Londoners, only depending on London supplies and London businesses? Of course we can't.
I'm not
I've
in a
never heard of
position to
anything so
comment on
well,
London,
I am in a position
but I
to
do
comment.
know
I am
that
in a
in
position to
India,
comment.
all this investment of $18 billion was made in the richest part of the richest
Well, he knows
capital
India,
in the
you know
country.
London.
Well,
Gotta Closing argument against the motion, Mani Shankar from India.
I think it's far more important to make India a sporting nation than to make it a nation which is renowned for hosting sports events. 95% of our children have no formal access to organized sports. And yet one finds that the amount of money that is available for projecting a completely false image of a prosperous India is much larger than is available to making it a sporting nation by providing facilities to poor students all around the country. I don't think we should allow the oligarchs of the sports business to take over a game which should be played in every village and in every courtyard.
All right, Mani Shankar, thank you. Audience, I'm going to remind you again how you voted at the beginning of this debate, before you heard any of the arguments, for the motion. The hosting of major sports events is good for a nation's health. For that motion, supporting it was 66%. Against was 20%, and the don't knows was 14%. You listen to the arguments of our four panellists, and this is how you have now voted. For the motion, 41%. Against the motion, 52%. The don't know, 70. The don't know, 7%. Congratulations to the winners. You turned it around. That was a very dramatic result. Commiseration to the losers.
They didn't hear my summing up.
That was quite extraordinary. So there you are, completely turned. You brought them over. Amazing, amazing. I've never known such a result. Okay, well, thank you to all our speakers.